Hello, my name is Dan Bowser. I'm the host and producer of the show. And before we jump into this episode, I just want to give you a quick heads up about what we're going to be covering in this conversation. So for this episode, I'm joined by Ben Robbins. Ben lives in northwest London with his wife and two daughters and has had a long-standing career in research and insight in the tech sector. Nearly 2 years ago, he was made redundant, and that's what this episode is going to be talking about in some detail. The experience forced him to confront a whole load of different truths about how closely he'd tied his identity to his work and how little time he'd actually spent looking after himself in the process. He talks about the shock and the grief that followed the redundancy, the patterns of overgiving and self-criticism that he's realised and actually made it harder for him to let go of that role that was taken from him. And he also talks about how therapy has helped him to rebuild from that position to a point where he's got a whole load more self-compassion. It's a really interesting and insightful conversation. He's a guy who's clearly thought about this stuff an awful lot. And the implications of all of these things for something that a lot of people are experiencing now and will experience in the future around redundancy. So I think you're going to find it really useful. Without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Hi, Ben. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you. Very good. Thank you.
Excellent. I can see the sun over your shoulder there, which
You're,
is an increasingly rare sight these days, isn't it?
I was going to block it out, but maybe it's better to have it there.
Oh, it's lovely. It's
Okay.
warming me up because right now this is sort of a dank November morning over in my neck of the woods. Um, Ben, please could you do the honor of introducing yourself to our audience? Could you give me name, age, where in the world you live, what you do for a living, etc., and also because I cannot stop thinking about food, your favorite sandwich.
All right. Thank you, Ben. I'm Ben Robbins. I'm 53. I live in northwest London with my wife Wanda and our two daughters. Last year, I launched my own business, Sound Insights, where I work with audio creators and commissioners, producers, marketers, and help people, help teams, businesses understand what people want to listen to next. Um, it's in terms of sandwich, that's a really good one. I'm trying to think of, I'm thinking of New Orleans, where my wife is from.
Oh,
The muffaladas there, they serve with all sorts of things that I'm blanking as to what's in them, but there is nothing like that I've ever had before or since. And so that is always top of mind when I go visit.
wow. I mean, I'm predisposed to throwing the curveball question and it being about food, right? But I think this may have just uncovered the forever question now. It might have to be a sandwich every time that I ask people about it because I'd never heard of that. And in a million years, I wouldn't have thought New Orleans. And now I'm trying to imagine what could be in a sandwich from New Orleans. I love this. That's it. I can tell you. I can tell you from this point onwards, Ben. It will always be about the sandwich.
Perfect.
Thank you for
Well, I'm gonna have to live this down now that I disclosed I can't recall what's in it now with my wife who's from there. So that's okay. That's an okay price to pay.
Well, when she hears this episode, I'm sure she'll start giving you one of those every single day just to make sure that you never forget what was in there. And it doesn't sound like that would be a bad thing, to be completely honest.
I'm absolutely fine with that punishment.
Excellent stuff, Ben. Thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. Really appreciate it. Um, the opening question, as always, with these chats is why is it that you've decided that now is the time for you to come forward and share your lived experiences of mental health?
So nearly 2 years ago now, started my workday, and learned that same day that my role was being terminated, I was being made redundant with immediate effect. And as those things happen, and it's a shock, as it is to everyone, and it's so widespread and prevalent now across all countries and industries, it set off a chain reaction of things that some of them, many of them were connected to that redundancy, but it also set off a whole wave of changes in how I perceive myself and how I project myself. And, you know, I think a lot about that gap between who we are and who we can be at our best. And I realized I was selling myself short on some levels, many levels. And I thought, as they were telling me this, the information they share when, you know, your roles come into an end, I'm listening, but I'm also recognizing in myself I'm having a parallel conversation that there's a fork in the road, and that this, as harsh as it was, and it was incredibly harsh for reasons we can get into a little bit, I knew I had a big choice to make here. And I knew at that moment it was going to get harder still, and I was going to grieve the loss of that role and what I built. And I was going to endure a lot of change and questioning and hit rock bottom. And then I knew I needed to figure out a pathway to get back, not just on my feet, but also go far beyond where I had been up until that point.
Mm.
Um, there was there was a lot of things going on at that time where I realized how hard it was for me to let go of that role. It had been both me at my best in growing a function, growing a team, helping businesses make better decisions, but also it was a very harsh environment as well, in that I didn't get the support I needed to go even further. And I went a long way. For the listener context, I was building a market research function within a tech business. And there's not too many harder ways to do that in a tech business, given their focus predominantly on behavioral data, dashboards to make decisions. And whereas I think there's a lot that gets missed in that type of data. Um, the patterns I was in was I had super served everyone else and had not taken care of my own needs. I was the person people would come to with questions and challenges, sometimes just to a sounding be as a sounding board. And yet I had no means, the person that people relied on, I had no framework to understand myself and my own needs and how to navigate that. And it never really struck me until that time. Um, there was also a point where I gave so much to everyone. Um, it became almost an addiction, and I think it was an addiction in some ways. You think about, well, what were the low moments? And there's a couple that come to mind. One being, I when I left, I made sure the team, that the remainder of the team were, I did what I could to set them up for success, and it both empowered them because they did so well with what they could. And they're really lovely people, resilient, really smart. They're really business first people, and they're doing tremendous work. And at one point, they said, "Ben, we've got this. We're good. You've done so much for us. We're really okay. You can let go." And I panicked at that moment because I was like, "Let go. I've built this function for like 8 years, and they're absolutely right. And they did the right thing to tell me in that way." And I panicked and I realized I needed to start to take care of myself. There was another moment later on that same year, 2024, where not only had I started to let go, but I actually started then to launch my business, looked at a potential partnership that was forming. I'd co-written a book, and everyone was like, "See, Ben, you've got this. You're doing so well. You're doing great." And inside I was screaming. I was like, I can't do this. I don't know where I'm going, what I'm doing. And that's when you learn so much about yourself, in those moments when you don't know really what you're doing. And I was panicking. And I remember I put on a post on LinkedIn and just said, kind of reflected a little bit on the story that got me there. And people were like, I didn't know that you were made redundant. You had previously walked away and announced you were leaving. And so, very thankful. And now you're telling me that you were made redundant. And even then, people were saying, yeah, you've got it. You can do this, Ben. And again, it was not what I needed. I needed to actually really sit down and kind of slow things down to the point, and really take care of and build that framework for myself. And so thankfully, a lot of those big decision moments that I made in the journey so far were the right ones. I think one of the best things I did was to turn to therapy, and was able to help me navigate, this was what happened. This was super harsh. It wasn't justified. You were trying to balance working for two different businesses every day. You had stakeholders and your team that were thrilled with what we were building together, and they were being supported to be successful. And on the other hand, you had this line management where it was really difficult to get the support I needed. And that was exhausting. And it led me to being someone who sought confirmation from others, prove their approval that I was doing the right thing. And I had to rewire myself to such a degree to stop looking for external validation and bring it back to me.
Interesting. Yeah, really, a really interesting story. I'm definitely interested to go through some of the kind of the details and the key things that you learned along the way there, Ben. But before we do that, I like to ask this question because recovery from something like that isn't a linear experience, right? You can
Right.
have highs and lows along the way, some false dawns to deal with. But to kind of set a bit of context for our audience, how has your last week been in terms of your mental health?
It's been really good. I've navigated through a lot of harsh moments and hard moments and questioning myself. And I think now the difference is different elements of my life are integrating to a place where I can see, you know, further distance I can go further on. As I said previously, I really loved that role I had and what I built. And now I can really see clearly there's a lot more growth there. There's a lot more potential to do the things I really think I'm passionate about and can do really well. So, different conversations are coming through where even in the past week, two opportunities for new projects, which I'm really excited about, also grounded that they may or may not happen. And that's part of the whole business dynamic. Physically, feeling really strong mentally. I'm in, a good place. Um, and I've also, watching my former business go through another round of layoffs and just seeing it's a trigger, there's no doubt. It reminds me a lot about this. And of course, thinking about coming to talk to you is also kind of reminding me of that journey. So there's navigating and reaching out to people who I know have been impacted and being there for them, in a more balanced way, not over giving, but also recognizing they need space to do what they need to do themselves. So, it's definitely it's a really interesting place, and it's a lot of healing work and getting stronger and going through the grief. It's not loud, it's things you do very quietly. No one notices. It's under the surface. You don't post it on LinkedIn. Hey, I'm healing and I'm doing really well. It's like, no, you have to do it for yourself first and foremost. And that's okay. And sometimes you have to do things you don't really want to do, but you know it's the right thing to do. And you just kind of build those steps up, one by one, and trust the process that, you can navigate through this.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And you got to. It's also about picking your sometimes forcing yourself to do things that you don't want to do is a good thing, but at the same time, double checking that it's the right time for you to do
Yeah,
those things is also
yeah.
important. No, I personally, I'm a chief procrastinator, so I can talk myself out of doing anything.
Mhm.
But I also recognize that a lot of the procrastination comes from a fear of the unknown.
Mhm.
The best way for me to get over the procrastination is to just do. So that is I think one of these kind of constant kind of tensions that I'm going to need to experience for the rest of my life. But I can sense that I'm getting better at doing more than I have been in the past. But it's a case of softly, softly catch you monkey, I think is the original Latin phrase.
Yeah, there's that space where you want to step out of your comfort zone, but maybe not so much that you feel completely lost, but
Yeah.
also doing it regularly in small amounts, you can build momentum and it almost becomes addictive, but at least you can do it in bite-sized pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's the plan. And there will always be more bite-sized pieces for you to take as well,
Yeah,
which is good. And I think allied to that is that just accepting the idea, and I say this as a perfectionist, that actually it's the journey that you're going on that's more important than where you're trying to get to.
yeah,
Um, because that's where you do all the learning. That's where you get to embrace the sort of the grey areas, the uncertainty, and it takes a lot longer to get somewhere than it does to actually be at that place as well, right? So you might as well enjoy the journey along the way. Let's talk about how that kind of relationship with your mental health has evolved. Then you've obviously talked about the specifics of the redundancy and the kind of the trigger for various feelings that was. Um, when I ask this question, I think it's important to say that you can start this, where did the journey begin from wherever is the appropriate place for you to start. But some people it's a couple of years ago, some people it's something that with reflection they can actually trace back much, much earlier in their life to kind of say, okay, well, I've always been a little bit, I don't know, anxious, for example, or whatever the underlying thing is. So in your own words, I guess when did you first start to notice, or when have you realized that you had a predisposition to these kind of mental health challenges?
I think a lot about my own anxieties. I think learning about the attachment system framework and my own anxious attachment that has come through very vividly to me on all different levels with different people has been the biggest wake up call. And I can then kind of navigate and look back at different moments from childhood forward. Um, I, deep down, there's a fear of abandonment that I can trace back to childhood and my parents divorcing and having I've gone through redundancy once before, and so I've built things now, frameworks and programs and tools to for businesses to succeed twice, and that was a big part of me wanting to now go and create it for myself. Um, at the end of the day, so there's the abandonment, there's the anxious attachment, there's the giving to over giving to people. I don't want to lose that generous sense of self, but I also realize I have to kind of dial it back a little bit and be comfortable, not over giving to prove my worth. Um, I think what's really interesting to me is, especially as a man, that ability to have people come to you seeking guidance and help, yet having nothing, no framework for myself is really perplexing. You know, I deal with research, with data, strategy, so it's all about frameworks and understanding things. I didn't forgot to do myself in some ways, or at least what I navigated in the last 2 years, it didn't really help me. So I had to build that from the ground up. Therapy was so interesting as a journey for me because a lot of people are, when they go through it, they're kind of resentful of their parents or their upbringing because so much happens in that time. I was the opposite. I actually had came out of it with more compassion and understanding that my parents did what they could with what they had, and that helped me with them and is helping me as they navigate their more senior years. Um, I think what am I trying to say here? It's there's always been a part of me that doesn't feel like I am where I should be at this stage in my life. I
Mm.
always feel I should be further along. And so I'm really trying to change those neural pathways and it be more accepting. I'm right here, I'm doing this right now. I'm at this steep learning curve with my new business and embrace it. It's a it is a fantastic journey. It's so fulfilling for me to learn so much about the business, so much about me and and I look back and how I've squeezed myself into small spaces to satisfy others and sacrifice my own needs. And so I'm really trying to step back and think about how can I do myself more justice? How can I really share and show the best version of myself to the rest of the world? Ultimately, yes, I still absolutely am driven to help other people. It's part of nature, I think, of the work I do to be for them to be successful. But I've also got to take care of home base at the same time. And so I'm really trying to navigate to a more balanced place where I can be that for myself and then give more in different ways to other people.
And how's with your therapy experience? Was your first experience of therapy as part of your response to this redundancy, or had you previously spoken to somebody?
This was the first experience I had with it. And I was conflicted because I was, at the same time, I've been trying to work towards that best version of myself. But I also felt I can't do that if I haven't figured out the base
Mm.
first. And so that's what made it compelling. The thing about therapy that struck me, especially with men, is I think men talk about therapy. You're probably the exception here. Men talk about therapy after they've gone through it,
Mm.
not during it. And I was noticed that quite quickly. And so I really over-indexed and I told a lot of people I was going through therapy and how much it helped me and was getting me back on my feet again. And that's I think an opportunity for men to think about in terms of how much value you get in the moment and to share it in that moment. And it's getting better, there's no doubt. You know, shows like this obviously showcasing the value of men coming forward to talk about the challenges they have. Um, but it's something I can't get enough of thinking about how I can do and react and understand things better. One way that's really one element of this that's really struck me, I think, in the past 2 years is the friendships, the connections, both within my former business and outside, how those friendships have not withstood the transition away in a new environment.
Interesting.
And this is not because any of them have been cruel or selfish. It just, without that structure, it hasn't been able to withstand the change. And I found myself applying logic to understanding people's decisions, realizing actually it's not about logic. It is just change in itself. And not everyone's going to be part of your life for as long as you would think. One analogy I like is it's like two musicians and they're playing different instruments in an orchestra. They have different tempo, they can have different volume, different types of instruments, but because they're in an orchestra, it works really well. You take those two musicians out of the orchestra, like you take two friends out of a business structure, they're playing those instruments, but they're at different cadence, different volume, different rhythm. Doesn't sound right. But both of those musicians aren't doing anything wrong. They're
Mm.
still doing it in the right way. They just don't have that structure. And so I found some peace in identifying and accepting that kind of change. And that's been a massive part for me because I do put a lot into friendships and connections and relationships. And part of the whole redundancy picture I think people don't really acknowledge enough is you can lose all those structure of frame of support structure that you once had. And it's harsh and you kind of you navigate it to the best of your abilities.
To extend that analogy in a slightly clumsy front of mind way, as I'm wont to,
Mm,
um, the other thing that happens is that it's not just that the two musicians from that orchestra are playing independently, doing the right thing, but it just doesn't make as much sense anymore.
yeah.
One of those musicians may have completely left that type of music and has maybe started off to a local jazz cafe and play avant
Mhm.
jazz, and they're having a whale of a time doing their own thing completely differently, whilst the other person has chosen a completely different path. So they're actually doing different stuff as well. Their options have changed, their context has changed, and I've noticed that with my own experiences. You know, a big part of the change that I needed to make after I um, had burnout from corporate life was I needed to not be thinking about how much money can I earn, where's my next career step going to come from. I just needed to get enough in to survive.
Mhm.
And then when you're suddenly focused on different things and you're seeing other people have newer cars, other people go on nicer holidays, um, those kind of signifiers of someone's doing okay, and you're there going, I'm not really motivated by that anymore. That's not what is going to matter to me in 10 years time. That that shift definitely affects who you choose to spend your time with as well,
Mhm.
and what you choose to spend your time doing, I would say.
Yeah.
uh, I don't know quite where I'm going with that one, but I feel like there is a parallel there with the dynamic of the relationships that you have once that context changes from quite an intensive working relationship and everybody's kind of focused on the same project or the same goals, and then suddenly you're removed from that whilst everyone else is still focused on that, and you're over here going, well, no, actually, I'm going to go off in this direction now.
Yeah.
It's a lot to get your head around.
It is. It is. It is. It really does. To your point, it's head spinning. There's like same people are doing there in there doing their thing, and you're not part of it anymore,
Hmm.
or you're in a different place observing it. Um, and I held on. I realize now I held on too tight, and you know I wish that hadn't happened, but there are so many other things going on in life at that same time. I watched my dad go into rapid cognitive decline through Alzheimer's. He's now in a home 24/7, and he can be safe, but multiple falls last year, losing what's going on around him. He just about recognizes me, but just seeing that, it's a big shift. And then there's been other changes around. We moved house, we rent here in London, and how complex that was for us to find another place to live. A business partnership that I thought was forming fell through. And then, your confidence is rock bottom. And then you have this bright idea to do the hardest thing, which is start on your own. And you're like, probably not the most intuitive thing to do, but again, I also think it's been the structure, the groundedness I needed to shake it off, or not shake. That's a bad word, but process it, go through it, and then think about who can I be, and that's that transformative part. That's super exciting.
So, question for you: something you just said then immediately made my ears prick up, which is, so you said that you'd chosen the hardest thing to do by starting your own thing.
Mm.
Would Is that actually harder, all things considered,
Mhm.
than it would have been to try and go into another corporate role
Mm.
and build back up from scratch from that kind of the reaction that you'd had to the redundancy and all of the things that you'd processed and the way that your confidence had been affected? Which of the two would be harder? And I'm not saying that there's a right or wrong answer to that, but it just kind of immediately got me thinking, is it better for you to be doing your own thing now than trying to fit in somewhere else and build the next stage of your career in a corporate?
Yeah, that's a good question. You can look at it either way. I think what would have been at the back of my mind is, am I going to go through that being abandoned again and pushed out the door? Or what I think is the wisdom of building and creating something that can reflect your own values in a way that maybe other corporate roles did not. Like, I feel very passionate about the corporate values, and I try to embody those with my team, and I think we all embrace them. The disconnect for me was not seeing the corporation maybe live true to their values.
Yeah.
That was the disconnect for me. So in building something new, I can now actually really embellish it and live and breathe it, both with clients and hopefully with freelancers and growing a team again in a new way. That's what really motivates me, is to break that glass ceiling and push myself into a space where I haven't done these things I'm trying to do right now. Um, one example is, so I looked through your questions and thought about where to direct the conversation. Um, and it's been good because I've already gone way off script from where I was meant to go, where I thought I would go. But also, there's the language I was using about myself. And it was almost like, well, am I bragging here by saying this? I was like, no, you're not bragging. You're rebuilding, you're reforming, you're getting confident again. It's a really exciting, positive place. And so it was good for me just to write it out and see, okay, this is who I am. And it's a new identity. And
Mm.
so I don't know if that's possible to do in the same way working for someone else. I think there are more doors opening for me to reimagine and recreate myself working for myself that I just don't think you can do working for a business.
I agree, because ultimately you're accountable to yourself,
Yeah.
and the decisions that you make, you're going to deal with the consequences of, be they good or bad. Whereas working for somebody else, there is always somebody else's agenda
Yeah.
determines how you do things. And maybe that's the key difference. Um, it's not necessarily what you do, not necessarily why you do it, but how you do it is entirely under your control now. And that's the
Yeah.
thing I think you'll derive the most enjoyment out of.
Hmm. Exactly. I think you've hit the right point there. Had to talk it through to get there, but yeah, you've got the right, exactly that right point. That's what's the most liberating. Um, Again, I think about how I've chosen, no one made me, I chose this to squeeze into small spaces to help others or make others happy and completely forgot about myself.
Mm. Excellent. Well, this is really exciting times. I'm going to be watching your evolution with interest, especially now we're connected on LinkedIn as well, Ben. Um,
Yeah.
let's talk about, I guess, some of the specific moments. And for this one, it's as much the light bulb moments that you've experienced along the way can be those realizations of the things that you need to start doing more of, but it can
Mhm.
equally be the things that you need to stop doing. You've suddenly realized this is not helping me at all. Um, do you have any kind of specific instances that come to mind when we talk about that?
Probably the single biggest change I've made is dialing up my self-compassion. Again, going back to my therapist, she hit this nail on the head ever so well, ever so kindly, appropriately, but she wouldn't let it go until it really clicked for me is that no matter what I've achieved, I always give it a caveat. Well, it was good, but I didn't quite do this right, but I achieved it. And I was doing that repeatedly, and she called me up on that. And I think that's probably the biggest learning moment for me in the past 2 years is that self-compassion. I there's been tremendous amount of change, and the analogy I've used for that is this is not the greatest phrasing, but it's like clearing out the overgrowth in your life. You have to let go of the job or different types of people that you thought you were connected to, different things. And so I did that probably end of last year. And it was really scary because like the garden or the yard or whatever you want to call it, it was pretty bare. Like there was nothing much there. And I was like, wow, I can look at this in two ways. Is it empty? Is it bare? Or is it full of potential to bring in new partnerships, new connections, new friendships, new things, new hobbies, places to go? And so that kind of has really helped me frame how to think about change and the opportunities that those doors open. I've really tried to distinguish to help me navigate the inevitable ups and downs, those moments of grieving and accepting, is to think about it. Is it productive grieving, or is it protective dwelling? Am I stuck on something because it feels safe and it's still there if I think about it? Or can I say, okay, this person, this memory, team memory, what have you, has come into mind and it's going to sit with me and it's going to be with me today. It's go, okay, but I'm going to continue building the new Ben, the new sound insights and the new version of me. And it's a choice. And once I made that distinction, every moment of grieving is no longer oh, I'm going backwards here. I'm actually pushing and I'm growing through it. There's a part of me is looking at my watch saying it's coming up to 2 years. Like, how long is this going to last? It's like, who knows? It's okay.
Mm.
Don't try to wrap it up quickly. Just bring it on, embrace it, and then let it kind of slip by and move forward. It's that both and mentality where you can accept what's happened and what's gone and where you are now. There's, like I said at the beginning, there's this big part of me in my previous role that I absolutely loved being that team leader, that person who built a function from scratch in a tech business, that person who business leaders would come to with questions and challenges and help and seek my advice and guidance. And I loved that part of it. That part is now gone or evolving now into something where it's in my own business. And so that grieving is natural, it's healthy, and you have to let that be. I think the grieving part for me has been, again, another eye-opening moment where I realize we all avoid pain. When it comes, you want to push it away. You know, do something to distract yourself, watch Netflix all day or whatever it might be, whatever habit, whatever escape. And I learned this over and over again in the past 2 years, actually sitting with that pain and not pushing it away. One, it helped me go through it a little faster than I anticipated. But two, I came to a better place of acceptance and understanding because I didn't push it away.
Mm.
And that for me was a really eye-opening part of like, wow, we are always pushing things we don't like away from us. Whereas if we sit with them or have that luxury to be able to sit with them, you can actually process things in different ways. So I hopefully that's a good range of examples of those moments where it's taken me onto a different trajectory and helped me process everything that's happened in the past 2 years.
It is, and the reason I was smiling when you started to answer that was because there's a clear parallel with a relatively recent experience that I've had, um, part of which has helped me to understand the difference between the the reaction that I have to something,
Mhm.
difference between that and the response that I make. So the reaction is the immediate emotional, whatever it is, the fog descends, the walls come up, I can't deal with this type thing, versus the response, which if you can catch the reaction, you can take it and move it to one side and say, right, I'm going to just leave this here for the next 12, 24 hours
Mhm.
to work out if that is my proper response or if that is just my gut reaction, because my gut reaction might not be right. So the act of being in a position to realize the difference between a reaction and a response has enabled me to just get on and do stuff instead of being preoccupied by the reaction that I'd had that was still kind of churning over in my head. It's not the same thing as kind of putting it to one side and ignoring it. It's intentionally saying, I'm going to move this over here. I will come back to it, but I'm going to give it some time first before I decide what I'm going to do about it. Um, and as a chief procrastinator, that has been pretty game changing for me because it's meant I've just got on and done things when I would have been stewing on them and overthinking it and making sure that nothing happened because I was protecting myself against this unknown quantity. So there's yeah, that absolutely rings true for me. Um, and the longer that you practice that, or the more that you practice being able to spot those reactions and set them to one side, the closer to a second nature that becomes.
Yeah,
And it's
that
huge.
is such a good, that is such a good description of the, widening the gap between stimulus and response. And in that space between stimulus and response is your freedom, our freedom to make a decision how to react to things. And
Mm.
I think probably where you would go next before I interrupted you was the more often you do it, you can almost gamify it and say, I'm not going to react to this right now. I'm going to hold off. and kind of make a game of it. But you also realize, wait 6, 12, 18 hours, it's going to be a different reaction to how you responded in that moment.
Yeah.
And so the more that you can widen that gap, the better decision making you make.
It's like the classic example of the angry email that you
Yeah.
write but don't send.
Yeah.
Not saying that all of the responses are negative and full of rage, obviously, but it's, you perhaps you're looking at your phone in the evening when you probably shouldn't be looking at your work emails. You see something come in and you have a visceral response, but you don't send it. You write it, you go back to it the next morning, you look at the draft, you adjust it,
Mhm.
and then you send it. And funnily enough, the outcome from that is much closer to what you would have wanted, than had you sent that initial email. It's the psychological process of doing that, catching the the response, the angry email response before you send it. Um, it's I'm only a few weeks into this realization,
Mhm.
but it's definitely a game changer.
Yeah.
So I can strongly advocate for anybody that wants to explore that a little bit further. Um, Ben, this has been a fascinating conversation. Um, if somebody's heard this discussion, let's say, and as you alluded to right at the start, lots of people are finding themselves in the position of um, the threat of redundancy, or they've actually been made redundant, and there's a journey that they're going to go on, as a result of that. Based on your experience, what's the most important thing, or what are the most important things that they can do?
The standard guidance given when people lose jobs is you mustn't too tightly associate your identity with your job. And for the rest of us mortals, that's really, really hard to do. Yes, ideally, Ben Robbins would have been separate from his previous role, at a previous employer, but I put my heart and soul into that. And, the ending was, I think, very cruel. But it happened. And so you have to accept and move on. But I think I think it's if it happens to you as a person, the listener, it's accepting what it is and realizing you are human and you are going to feel a lot of hurt and pain, and to work through that. I would absolutely advocate for working with a therapist or a life coach or getting professional help. It is extraordinary as a game changer, and take your time and find the right one that works best for you. It's not necessarily going to be the one that your friend might recommend. It might be, probably is going to be someone different. I would also encourage people to give themselves the benefit of the doubt to start again and again and again, and don't have any shame with that. It's like, it's not a to B straight line. It is a constant iteration process until you get to that right place. And so I started to revamp myself over and over again. I think I probably always will to some degree. And that's okay. And just to give yourself that compassion. I think probably the one biggest eye opener right now is thinking about life holistically. So here's an example. I did a I had my best running program earlier this year to run the London Half Marathon. The training program went so well. I felt physically, really strong, ran a good time despite some last minute hurdles around a bad back and so on. And I was just astonished and a good reminder, this is what I can do, even as a physical goal. But it didn't help necessarily my mind get stronger or the processing of the grieving and accepting of change any better. So now what I'm doing for the year ahead is to build a more integrated program where yes, I've got business goals, but they align with family goals, better quality time on weekends and evenings, going away next summer if I can for the month of August, just taking time off to be with family and prioritize, but still have the business be anti-fragile enough to withstand that kind of pause. And I want to build, more transformative physical goals that again will strengthen my resilience at work. And so by building what I call your energy, your work, and your love together, and approaching all three holistically as they all depend on each other, I think is the way to come out of this disappointment and change in direction career wise to bring it together. You can't, I don't think it's feasible or possible to do one of those and not, you run the risk of still being in the same place. You've got to integrate all these pieces together and think, what can I do to, I'm thinking, how can I be in such a different place that my past, I can barely see it by the end of next year. Like it's a version of me I cannot even comprehend or think about. It would be so different to who I am going to be 12 months from now. And that's the vision I'm trying to work towards.
Mm, that's powerful. And I think as you were saying that, I was just, minded that how easy it is for somebody to, especially with a job that is highly pressurized, to give a disproportionate amount of your focus to that
Mm.
without thinking about how integral those other elements are to one, helping you to be the best that you can be at work, but
Yeah,
also helping you to live a kind of a purposeful and contented life. Um, work does it looms. There's one, we need money, right? If you don't have money, then you can't eat, you can't put a roof over your head, you can't heat the house, etc. But work preoccupies so much of our headspace beyond money, um, because we let it, because we're not often prioritizing the other things that matter: family,
yeah.
physical health, and wellness. Um,
Hmm.
and it's so easy to slip into that, and that's that. I'm convinced that was a big part of my life, my lived experience of mental health, and I'm sure it's a big part of many other people's experiences. We what do we do? We spend our life sleeping and working. Those are the two things that we mostly do, right?
Hmm.
Um, but we have to actively balance those out, um, across our other needs. I think it's a really helpful way of framing that stuff, and that's something I'm going to endeavour to lift from this conversation and apply to my own approach to things as well, Ben. So that's
Yeah.
your kind of loose framework that you've just described there. I'm absolutely going to go, right, take that, put it over here, try and work out how I can more actively focus on some of those elements as well. Um, it's a biggie. Thank you,
Yeah.
Ben.
Yeah, it's important on another level to think about it is the example you set to your children. It's like this happened to dad, and from that he then kind of led and guided his life in this direction. And this is how to model to them how to rebound from setbacks, which are going to happen no matter who you are. They are going to happen. It's how you respond to it. So there's a lot for me in setting an example for them, how to live with integrity and really be grounded and have balance. And I'm all for over-indexing and being passionate about working, but I also want to make sure I've got clearer boundaries going forward as well.
Yeah. Yeah, couldn't agree more. Ben, thank you so much. Um, as I said at the start, I knew this was going to be an interesting conversation, and I think it's going to be really valuable for people to hear this and your experiences. Um, for everybody that has listened to us or watched the episode, thank you. If you found this helpful, we would really appreciate it if you could share this with people that need to see it. So whether that's across your social medias, pinging it in a WhatsApp message, emails, however you can get this in front of people that need to see it, all of that sharing really helps us to reach the people that need it most. If you're listening to this on one of the podcasting platforms, we would massively appreciate some reviews. We are getting a small number of 5-star reviews across Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. But the more of those we get, the better distributed the podcast is, and the more likely it is that it can help other people as well. Thank you, Ben, and to everybody else for listening. We will be back again very soon with another episode of Good Enough Chats.